They believed their rifles were adequate. For 5 years, Japanese infantry had fought across China, Malaya, the Philippines, and dozens of Pacific islands with the Type 99 Arisaka, a bolt-action rifle that represented decades of careful engineering and battlefield refinement. They had trained with it until the manual of arms became muscle memory. They could cycle the bolt, extract the spent cartridge, chamber a new round, and fire again in just over a second if they were fast. Their instructors had told them this was sufficient. Their officers had assured them that discipline and fighting spirit would overcome any material disadvantage. They were wrong. The morning of November 20th, 1943, on the island of Betio in the Tarawa Atoll, a Japanese soldier named Tadao Onuki crouched in a reinforced concrete bunker overlooking the western beaches. He was 24 years old, a veteran of campaigns in China and the Solomons. His Type 99 rifle rested against the bunker wall, its bolt well oiled, its 5-round magazine fully loaded. He had fired perhaps 10,000 rounds through this weapon in training and combat. He knew its precise weight, its balance point, the exact pressure needed on the trigger. He trusted it completely. Through the firing port, he watched American landing craft approaching through the coral reef. Marines, hundreds of them. The naval bombardment had stopped. The island was quiet except for the sound of waves and the distant rumble of boat engines. Onuki checked his rifle one more time. He worked the bolt smoothly, confirming a round was chambered. His ammunition pouch held 20 additional rounds in stripper clips, 100 rounds total among the 5 men in his bunker. It seemed like enough. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The Marines came ashore at 09:10 hours. Onuki aimed carefully at a figure stumbling through the shallow water. He fired. The rifle kicked solidly against his shoulder. He worked the bolt, ejecting the spent cartridge, chambering a fresh round. He fired again. The manual actions felt automatic, practiced, efficient. He had done this hundreds of times. But something was wrong. The Marines were not falling the way Chinese soldiers had fallen. They were firing back, and the volume of fire coming from the beach was unlike anything Onuki had experienced. He could hear it even inside the bunker, not the sharp crack of individual rifle shots. A continuous roar. The Marines were shooting constantly, without pause, without the necessary gap for reloading that should have given defenders time to aim, to fire, to find cover. Onuki cycled his bolt again, aimed, fired, worked the bolt. He reached for his ammunition pouch, pulled out a stripper clip, pressed the 5 rounds down into the magazine. The entire process took perhaps 4 seconds. 4 seconds, during which he could not fire, could not defend, could only load. On the beach, the Marines never stopped shooting. Their weapons fired and fired and fired, 8 rounds without reloading, while Onuki was still working his bolt to chamber his second shot. He did not understand what he was seeing. He did not understand the weapon the Americans carried. He would not live long enough to fully comprehend the disadvantage he faced, but in those first moments of combat at Tarawa, Japanese soldiers across the Pacific were about to learn a terrible lesson about the difference between adequate and overwhelming. The Type 99 Arisaka rifle was not an accident of design. It was the product of careful Japanese military thinking that stretched back to the turn of the 20th century, refined through years of combat experience and tactical doctrine. When Colonel Nariakira Arisaka developed the original Type 38 rifle in 1905, he created one of the strongest bolt-action rifles ever manufactured. The Mauser-inspired action could handle higher chamber pressures than almost any contemporary rifle. The weapon was reliable, accurate, and well-suited to the shorter stature of Japanese soldiers. By the 1930s, Japanese military planners recognized that their 6.5mm cartridge lacked stopping power. Combat reports from China indicated that enemy soldiers hit by Type 38 rounds often continued fighting. The Imperial Japanese Army responded by developing a new 7.7mm cartridge with substantially more energy. The Type 99 rifle, adopted in 1939, was built around this more powerful round. It retained the proven Arisaka bolt action while providing enhanced terminal ballistics. The rifle weighed approximately 8 pounds. It measured 44 inches overall with a 26-inch barrel. The internal magazine held 5 rounds, loaded from stripper clips. Early production models included features that seemed advanced for the era. A folding monopod provided stability for aimed fire. Anti-aircraft sights suggested forward-thinking tactical flexibility. A dust cover protected the bolt mechanism in harsh environments. The chrome-lined barrel, a world first for military bolt-action rifles, resisted corrosion in the humid Pacific climate. Japanese infantry doctrine emphasized aimed fire and bayonet charges. Recruits spent months perfecting their marksmanship. They learned to estimate range, adjust for wind, and place shots with precision. The philosophy valued quality over quantity. One well-aimed shot that hit the target was worth more than 10 rounds fired wildly. The bolt-action rifle fit this doctrine perfectly. It forced discipline. Each shot required deliberate action. The soldier aimed, fired, worked the bolt, aimed again. There was rhythm to it, a measured cadence that reflected Japanese military values of control and precision. Training manuals specified exact procedures for loading. The soldier would press the bolt handle down and pull it rearward, extracting the spent cartridge and cocking the firing pin. He would then push the bolt forward, stripping a new cartridge from the magazine and chambering it. Finally, he would rotate the bolt handle down, locking the action. A well-trained soldier could complete this cycle in just over 1 second. The manuals claimed that a proficient rifleman could maintain a rate of fire of 15 to 20 rounds per minute under combat conditions. This seemed adequate. Chinese forces Japan fought from 1937 onward were often poorly equipped with outdated rifles and limited ammunition. Japanese infantry, with their Type 99 seconds, enjoyed clear superiority. Victory after victory reinforced the belief that the rifle was sufficient. When Japan expanded the war into Southeast Asia and the Pacific in 1941 and 1942, the pattern continued. British and Dutch colonial forces, American defenders in the Philippines, all fell to Japanese assaults. The Type 99 performed exactly as designed. Japanese soldiers came to trust their rifles absolutely. The weapon became an extension of their bodies. They could field strip and reassemble it blindfolded. They knew the sound of the bolt cycling, the feel of the recoil, the precise sight picture needed at various ranges. Many soldiers personalized their rifles, wrapping the stocks with cord for better grip in wet conditions, or carefully adjusting the sights for their individual shooting characteristics. The rifle was more than a tool. It represented Japanese military tradition, the warrior spirit, the discipline that made the Imperial Army formidable. The Japanese military establishment in 1943 remained confident in their infantry weapons. Reports from field commanders consistently praised the Type 99's reliability. The rifle functioned in desert heat and jungle humidity. It survived rough handling, inadequate maintenance, and the corrosive effects of saltwater exposure. When ammunition was scarce, the 5-round magazine meant less waste. Soldiers fired only when they had clear targets. This conservation of ammunition aligned with Japanese logistics capabilities. Japanese ordnance officers were aware that other nations had developed semi-automatic rifles. The Soviet Tokarev SVT-40 had entered service in 1940. The American M1 Garand had been adopted even earlier, in 1936. Japanese intelligence had captured examples of both weapons and conducted evaluations. The reports acknowledged certain advantages of semi-automatic operation, but emphasized significant drawbacks. Semi-automatic rifles were heavier, more complex, more difficult to manufacture, and more prone to malfunction. They required more ammunition, straining already difficult supply lines. The conclusion was that bolt-action rifles remained the practical choice for Japan's circumstances. This assessment was not entirely wrong. Japan's industrial base could not match American or Soviet production capacity. Japanese factories struggled to produce enough rifles to equip expanding forces. The Type 99 was relatively simple to manufacture. A semi-automatic rifle would have required retooling entire production facilities, training workers in more complex assembly procedures, and establishing new supply chains for additional parts. Japanese military planners calculated that they could produce 3 or 4 Type 99 rifles in the time, and with the resources needed for one semi-automatic rifle. Given Japan's strategic situation, quantity seemed more important than individual weapon sophistication. Japanese tactical doctrine further reinforced this decision. The Imperial Army emphasized night attacks, infiltration, and close-quarters combat, where bayonets and grenades often proved more decisive than rifle fire. In these scenarios, the difference between bolt action and semi-automatic seemed less significant. A soldier who closed to hand range did not need rapid-fire capability. He needed a sturdy rifle with a sharp bayonet. The Type 99 excelled in this role. Its length with fixed bayonet gave Japanese soldiers reach advantage in close combat. The strong action could withstand being used as a club when necessary. Training emphasized these close combat tactics. Recruits spent weeks practicing bayonet drills. They learned to charge through defensive fire, accepting casualties as inevitable, counting on momentum and shock to overwhelm the enemy. This banzai charge doctrine had worked against Chinese forces with limited automatic weapons. It had worked against British colonial troops in Malaya, who were unprepared for such aggressive tactics. Japanese commanders believed it would continue to work, that fighting spirit and willingness to die would overcome material disadvantages. The propaganda reinforced this belief. Japanese soldiers were told they were superior warriors, descendants of samurai, imbued with Yamato Damashi, the spirit of Japan. They were fighting for the emperor, for their families, for the divine mission of the Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. American soldiers, by contrast, were depicted as soft, undisciplined, dependent on material comfort. Japanese propaganda suggested that Americans lacked the spiritual strength for sustained combat, that they would break when faced with determined Japanese attacks. This narrative was comforting. It explained away Japan's industrial inferiority by emphasizing spiritual superiority. The Type 99 rifle fit perfectly into this worldview. It was a weapon for disciplined marksmen, not for soldiers who wasted ammunition with automatic fire. Each carefully aimed shot reflected Japanese values. The bolt-action mechanism forced the soldier to think, to aim, to make each round count. This was the proper way of war. The Japanese way, superior to the wasteful American approach. By November 1943, this entire belief system was about to face its harshest test. The M1 Garand rifle that Marines carried ashore at Tarawa represented a fundamentally different philosophy of infantry combat. John Cantius Garand, a Canadian-born engineer working at Springfield Armory, had spent 15 years developing a semi-automatic rifle that could meet the United States Army's exacting standards. His design, adopted in 1936, was revolutionary not because it introduced new concepts, but because it made those concepts reliable enough for mass military service. The Garand was a gas-operated rifle. When fired, a portion of the propellant gases were bled off through a port in the barrel. These gases drove a piston connected to an operating rod. The rod cycled rearward, rotating and extracting the bolt, ejecting the spent cartridge, and cocking the hammer. A recoil spring then drove the operating rod forward, stripping a new cartridge from the magazine, chambering it, and locking the bolt. The entire cycle occurred in a fraction of a second, faster than any human could work a bolt action. The rifle weighed 9.5 pounds, slightly more than the Type 99. It measured 43.6 inches overall, with a 24-inch barrel. The critical difference was the magazine system. The Garand used an en-bloc clip holding 8 rounds of 30-06 Springfield ammunition. The clip was inserted from the top, pushing down until it locked into place. When the last round was fired, the empty clip ejected automatically with a distinctive metallic ping, and the bolt locked open, ready for immediate reloading. This system gave trained soldiers a rate of fire between 40 and 50 rounds per minute under combat conditions. More importantly, it allowed continuous fire without breaking the shooting position. A Marine could keep his rifle shouldered, his cheek against the stock, his eye aligned with the sights, and fire 8 rounds as fast as he could pull the trigger. There was no need to move his hands to work a bolt, no need to break his sight picture, no interruption in his ability to engage targets. American training doctrine emphasized this advantage. Marine recruits at boot camp fired thousands of rounds learning to handle the Garand. They practiced rapid magazine changes, dropping empty clips and inserting fresh ones in under 2 seconds. They learned to fire from standing, kneeling, and prone positions without adjusting their grip or stance. The training stressed sustained fire, putting rounds downrange quickly and accurately, suppressing enemy positions while maneuvering elements advanced. Marine Corps doctrine by 1943 had evolved based on combat experience. At Guadalcanal, where Marines initially fought with M1000, 903 Springfield bolt-action rifles, officers noted that Japanese night attacks and banzai charges created situations where volume of fire proved decisive. When Army units arrived with M1 Garands in October 1942, Marines immediately recognized the tactical advantage. Soldiers with Garands could fire 3 to 4 times faster than Marines with Springfields, while maintaining comparable accuracy. Reports from the field were unambiguous. Marines wanted Garands. They traded equipment for them, acquired them from casualties, and in some cases simply took them from Army supply dumps. Marine Corps leadership accelerated the transition. By the time of the Tarawa Assault in November 1943, the 2nd Marine Division was fully equipped with M1 Garands. Every rifleman carried the weapon. Every fire team could now deliver sustained suppressive fire. The ammunition situation reflected American industrial capacity. Each Marine went ashore with 80 rounds, 10 en-bloc clips of 8 rounds each. Additional ammunition was landed continuously throughout the operation. Supply dumps on the beach held hundreds of thousands of rounds. There was no concern about conservation. Marines were trained to fire when they saw targets, to maintain constant pressure on Japanese positions, to never give the enemy time to aim carefully or maneuver without being engaged. The psychological impact of this firepower advantage extended beyond mere capability. It changed how Marines fought. With a bolt-action rifle, a soldier had to carefully select targets, had to make each shot count because reloading took time. With a Garand, a Marine could engage multiple targets in rapid succession, could fire at movement in the jungle without worrying about wasting ammunition, could suppress an entire enemy position single-handedly while his squad moved. The Battle of Tarawa lasted 76 hours. In that time, Japanese defenders discovered that everything they believed about infantry combat was catastrophically wrong. The Marines came ashore under intense fire from carefully prepared defensive positions. Japanese soldiers in concrete bunkers and log-reinforced emplacements had clear fields of fire across the beaches. They had adequate ammunition. They had good positions. By all tactical calculations based on previous experience, they should have stopped the landing. They did not stop it. The Marines absorbed horrific casualties, but continued advancing. And the volume of fire they returned was incomprehensible to the defenders. Japanese soldiers would fire, work their bolts, aim for a second shot, and in that brief interval, multiple Marines would fire back. Not single shots, strings of shots. 8 rounds from one rifle, 8 from another, 8 from a third. The sound was continuous, overwhelming, like nothing Japanese veterans had experienced in China or earlier Pacific battles. A Japanese naval officer, captured after his bunker was overrun on the 2nd day, told his interrogators that his first thought was that the Americans must be using machine guns disguised as rifles. He could not believe that individual soldiers were producing such sustained fire with standard infantry weapons. The interrogation report, preserved in Marine Corps archives, records his statement. "We were told the Americans had a new rifle, but we expected something like our rifle, only semi-automatic. We did not expect this volume of fire. One American could fire as fast as 3 of our soldiers." The mathematics of the disparity were brutal. A Japanese soldier with a Type 99 could fire approximately 15 to 20 aimed shots per minute. A Marine with an M1 Garand could fire 40 to 50 aimed shots per minute. In a one-on-one engagement, the Marine had a 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 advantage in rounds fired. but the battles at Tarawa were never one-on-one. They were squad against squad, platoon against platoon. A Marine fire team of 4 men with Garands could collectively fire 160 to 200 rounds per minute. A comparable Japanese team with Type 99 seconds could fire 60 to 80 rounds per minute. The disparity became more pronounced in close-quarters fighting. When Marines assaulted bunkers or fought through defensive positions, Japanese defenders attempted to use their bayonets and conduct close-range counterattacks. These tactics had worked in China. They failed at Tarawa. Marines could fire continuously as they advanced, putting rounds into any target that appeared, never needing to pause to work a bolt. Japanese soldiers who had trained for years in bayonet combat found themselves shot before they could close the distance. One Marine corporal, interviewed for the Division After Action report, described engaging a group of Japanese soldiers who charged his position near the airfield. There were maybe 8 or 10 of them. They came out of a dugout about 30 yards away, yelling and running straight at us. I fired all 8 rounds, dropped the clip, slammed in another, and fired 6 more rounds before they reached our line. I personally shot 4 of them. The other 2 guys in my fire team got the rest. The whole thing took maybe 10 seconds. The Japanese response to this firepower was to intensify their banzai charges, believing that sheer determination and numbers could overwhelm American positions. This was exactly the wrong tactic. The charges concentrated Japanese troops in the open, where every Marine could engage multiple targets. The Garand's sustained fire rate meant that even a small number of Marines could stop attacks by much larger Japanese forces. At one position on the second night, 18 Marines with Garands defeated a banzai charge by approximately 100 Japanese soldiers. The Marine position did not fall. 67 Japanese bodies were counted in front of the defensive line the next morning. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Japanese officers recognized the problem but had no solution. Radio intercepts translated after the battle included messages requesting reinforcements, reporting heavy casualties, and describing the difficulty of mounting effective counterattacks against American firepower. One message, sent late on the second day, stated simply, "Enemy small arms fire is continuous. Our attacks cannot succeed under these conditions." The captured Japanese naval officer provided the most detailed account of how the firepower disparity affected Japanese tactical thinking. During his interrogation, he explained that Japanese defensive doctrine assumed that American troops would need to pause periodically to reload their rifles. Japanese fire teams were trained to coordinate their shooting so that some men were always firing while others reloaded. This created continuous defensive fire, even with bolt-action rifles. The tactic worked when both sides had similar weapons. Against Marines with Garands, the tactic failed. The Americans never stopped shooting. There were no gaps in their fire where Japanese soldiers could safely move, aim carefully, or conduct coordinated counterattacks. The naval officer described watching from his bunker as a Marine squad advanced across open ground toward his position. They moved in pairs. One man would fire while the other ran forward a few meters. Then they would switch. But the firing never stopped. Even when one Marine was moving, the other was shooting. They fired constantly, without pause. We could not aim properly because bullets were hitting around us all the time. This suppressive fire capability changed the fundamental dynamics of infantry combat. With bolt-action rifles, both sides had periods of vulnerability while reloading. Skilled soldiers learned to time their movements during these gaps. But the Garand eliminated most of those gaps. Marines could maintain continuous fire, pinning Japanese defenders in place, while other Marines maneuvered to flanking positions. Japanese soldiers found themselves unable to return effective fire because they could not expose themselves long enough to aim without being hit. The Type 99's magazine capacity created an additional problem. After firing 5 rounds, a Japanese soldier needed to reload using a stripper clip. This required taking his eyes off the target, looking down at the rifle, positioning the clip correctly, and pressing the rounds into the magazine. The entire process took 3 to 4 seconds, during which the soldier was completely defensively. Marine doctrine specifically trained soldiers to watch for enemy reload periods and engage targets during those brief windows. Japanese soldiers who survived the battle reported a growing sense of helplessness as the fighting continued. They would fire their 5 rounds, drop behind cover to reload, and during those few seconds, multiple Marines would fire back, often hitting the position where the Japanese soldier had just been visible. The psychological impact was severe. Soldiers became reluctant to expose themselves to fire, because they knew they could only get 1 or 2 shots before needing to reload, and during the reload, they would be completely vulnerable. By the 3rd day of the battle, Japanese resistance had collapsed not because they lacked courage or determination, but because they could not effectively engage an enemy with such overwhelming firepower advantage. The survivors, trapped in isolated bunkers and dugouts, understood that they faced an impossible situation. They could surrender, which Japanese military culture made unthinkable, or they could fight until killed. Most chose to fight. Few survived. The final casualty figures told the story. The 2nd Marine Division suffered 1,996 killed and 2,371 wounded. These were horrific losses for a 76-hour battle. But of the 4,836 Japanese defenders on Betio, only 17 were captured alive, the rest were killed. The disparity was not explained by Japanese willingness to die or American tactical superiority alone. It was fundamentally about firepower. Marines with Garands could deliver 3 times the volume of fire as Japanese soldiers with Type 99 seconds, and that advantage proved decisive in every engagement. American after-action reports from Tarawa emphasized the Garands' performance. One report noted, "The M1 rifle functioned satisfactorily in all conditions encountered. Despite exposure to saltwater, sand, and continuous use, weapon malfunctions were minimal. The rapid rate of fire provided by the semi-automatic action gave our troops a significant advantage in all combat situations." The report made no mention of Japanese weapons except to note that captured Type 99 rifles were well-made bolt-action weapons of conventional design. That conventional design was the problem. The Type 99 was adequate for the warfare Japan had prepared to fight. It was utterly inadequate for the warfare Japan was actually fighting. Word of what happened at Tarawa spread through Japanese military channels with the speed of catastrophe. Field commanders on other Pacific islands received reports describing the American firepower advantage. Intelligence officers analyzed captured Marine equipment and confirmed what survivors reported. The Americans possessed a semi-automatic rifle that fundamentally altered infantry combat dynamics. Japanese military leadership faced an uncomfortable truth. Their soldiers were outgunned by a weapon that had been in American service since 1936. The Japanese response revealed the depth of their industrial limitations. In early 1944, the Yokosuka Naval Arsenal began a crash program to develop a semi-automatic rifle. Engineers examined captured M1 Garands and attempted to reverse engineer the design. They discovered that simply copying the Garand was impossible. The on-block clip system would not reliably feed the 7.7mm Arisaka cartridge. The operating rod and gas system required precision manufacturing beyond what most Japanese factories could achieve consistently. The result was the Type 4 rifle, a modified Garand design that fed from a 10-round internal magazine using 2 standard Arisaka stripper clips. By the time Japan surrendered in August 1945, approximately 250 Type 4 rifles had been produced. Only about 100 were actually assembled into functioning weapons. None saw combat. The program was too little, too late, a desperate attempt to close a gap that had already determined the war's outcome. For Japanese soldiers on the remaining Pacific islands, there would be no semi-automatic rifles. They would fight with the weapons they had. At Saipan in June 1944, at Peleliu in September, at Iwo Jima in February 1945, and at Okinawa from April to June 1945, Japanese infantry armed with Type 99 rifles faced Marines and soldiers with M1 Garands. The pattern established at Tarawa repeated with brutal consistency. Japanese defensive positions, no matter how well prepared, could not withstand the sustained American firepower. Banzai charges, once considered a fearsome tactic, became suicide attacks that accomplished little except adding to the casualty counts. The psychological impact on Japanese soldiers deepened with each battle. Veterans who survived multiple campaigns understood they were fighting with inferior equipment against an enemy with unlimited resources. Diaries and letters recovered from dead Japanese soldiers reflected this growing despair. One entry, found on Saipan, read, "The Americans fire without stopping. We fire once and must reload while their bullets strike all around. How can we win against such weapons?" Japanese military doctrine attempted to adapt. Commanders emphasized defensive tactics, digging deeper fortifications, creating interlocking fields of fire, coordinating with artillery and mortars to compensate for infantry firepower disadvantages. These adjustments helped inflict higher casualties on attacking Americans, but they could not change the fundamental imbalance. When combat came down to rifle against rifle, the side with Garands possessed an insurmountable advantage. The most telling adaptation was the abandonment of aggressive infantry tactics. By 1945, Japanese commanders no longer ordered large-scale banzai charges except as last-resort suicide attacks when positions were about to be overrun. Instead, they fought defensive battles, forcing Americans to assault prepared positions, accepting that defeat was inevitable but trying to extract maximum cost. This shift from offensive to purely defensive thinking reflected the complete collapse of confidence in Japanese infantry capabilities. American industrial production, meanwhile, continued to accelerate. By war's end, approximately 5.4 million M1 Garands had been manufactured. Every Marine, every Army infantryman, every soldier in combat zones carried the weapon. The United States was the only major combatant to equip its standard infantry with semi-automatic rifles. Germany, Britain, and the Soviet Union all relied primarily on bolt-action rifles throughout the war. Japan faced not just an American advantage, but a unique American advantage that no other nation could match. The broader implications of the Garands' dominance extended beyond individual battles. American tactical doctrine evolved to leverage the weapon's capabilities. Infantry squads became more aggressive, using sustained rifle fire to suppress enemy positions while maneuvering elements flanked and destroyed them. The fire and maneuver tactics that became standard in the Marine Corps and Army depended fundamentally on having enough firepower to keep enemy heads down. The Garand made these tactics possible at the rifle squad level. Japanese forces, by contrast, became increasingly defensive and static. Without the firepower to effectively suppress American positions, Japanese soldiers could not maneuver in the open. They fought from fixed fortifications, from caves and bunkers, relying on concealment and protection rather than mobility. This defensive posture surrendered the initiative to American forces, who could attack at times and places of their choosing, knowing they possessed superior firepower at the point of contact. The casualty ratios reflected this imbalance. At Tarawa, the Marines suffered roughly 1 casualty for every 2 Japanese killed. At Saipan, the ratio was approximately 1 American casualty for every 3 Japanese killed. At Iwo Jima, despite Japanese defensive advantages, the ratio remained similar. At Okinawa, it widened further. These ratios cannot be attributed solely to rifle firepower, but post-war analysis consistently identified American semi-automatic rifles as a significant contributing factor to Japanese casualties. American soldiers and Marines recognized their advantage. After-action interviews conducted during the war reveal widespread appreciation for the Garand. One Marine sergeant, interviewed after Peleliu, stated, "I wouldn't trade my Garand for 3 Jap rifles. I can put more rounds on target in 10 seconds than a Jap can in 30 seconds. That's the difference between going home and not going home." This confidence affected morale and combat effectiveness. American infantry knew they had better equipment and fought with the assurance that advantages brings. The contrast with European theatre experiences is illuminating. In Europe, American forces faced German troops who, while primarily equipped with bolt-action Kar 98K rifles, also fielded significant numbers of MG-42 machine guns and St-G-44 assault rifles late in the war. German tactical doctrine emphasized machine gun-centered infantry squads. The Garand provided Americans an advantage over German riflemen, but not the overwhelming superiority it offered against Japanese infantry. European combat remained more evenly matched in terms of small arms firepower. In the Pacific, no such balance existed. Japanese infantry squads lacked the automatic weapons density of German units. The Nambu light machine gun was less reliable and less common than the German MG-42. Japanese tactical doctrine remained centered on riflemen with bolt-action weapons. Against this force structure, the Garands' advantages were maximized. Every American rifleman could outshoot every Japanese rifleman. The cumulative effect across entire battalions and divisions was decisive. The post-war period brought broader recognition of what had occurred. Military historians analyzing the Pacific War identified American material superiority as the fundamental factor in victory. Among the elements of that superiority, the M1 Garand featured prominently. General George Patton's famous quote calling it the greatest battle implement ever devised became widely known. The rifle achieved iconic status, symbol of American industrial prowess and military effectiveness. For Japan, the lesson was bitter. The nation's industrial capacity had proven inadequate to modern warfare. Japanese factories that struggled to produce enough bolt-action rifles could never have manufactured semi-automatic weapons in the quantities needed. The Type 99 Arisaka, for all its reliability and craftsmanship, represented the limits of what Japan could field. Those limits doomed Japanese infantry to fight at a permanent disadvantage from Tarawa onward. Surviving Japanese veterans rarely spoke about their wartime experiences, but when they did, many mentioned the American rifles. The psychological impact of facing an enemy who could fire 3 times faster stayed with them. It was not just defeat they remembered, but the feeling of helplessness, of knowing before each battle that their weapons were inferior and there was nothing they could do about it. The morning Tadao Onuki died at Tarawa, he understood something his training had never prepared him for. In the final moments before a Marine flamethrower team destroyed his bunker, he had fired perhaps 40 rounds from his Type 99 rifle. He had worked the bolt 40 times, reloaded 8 times, and killed or wounded an unknown number of Marines. But the Marines never stopped coming, and they never stopped shooting. For every round he fired, 10 came back. For every second he needed to reload, the Marines fired continuously. This was the reality that Japanese infantry faced throughout the Pacific War. They were disciplined soldiers with reliable weapons and intensive training. They possessed courage and determination. They were willing to die for their cause. None of it mattered when they could only fire 20 rounds per minute while their enemies fired 50. The mathematics of that disparity were unforgiving. The tactical implications were insurmountable. The strategic consequences were inevitable. The Type 99 Arisaka was adequate for the war Japan expected to fight. It was a weapon for disciplined marksmen engaging enemies with similar equipment. It worked perfectly in that context. But Japan did not fight the war it expected. It fought the United States, a nation with industrial capacity Japan could not match and would not fully comprehend until defeat was certain. The M1 Garand symbolized that capacity, a semi-automatic rifle mass-produced by the millions, while Japan struggled to manufacture enough bolt-action weapons. The story of these 2 rifles illuminates a larger truth about the Pacific War. Material superiority decided the outcome. Japanese fighting spirit, tactical skill, and willingness to sacrifice meant nothing against American industrial power. The disparity existed in ships, aircraft, artillery, and logistics. But it was most visceral at the rifle level, where individual soldiers felt the imbalance with every engagement. A Japanese soldier with a Type 99 could do everything correctly, aim perfectly, fire accurately, and still lose the firefight to a Marine with a Garand who could fire 3 times faster. By war's end, approximately 3.5 million Type 99 rifles had been produced in Japan. Many remained in warehouses, never issued, as American submarines cut off supply routes to forward positions. Japanese soldiers on isolated islands fought with whatever weapons they possessed, often running out of ammunition long before American assaults ended their resistance. The rifles themselves were not the problem. They functioned reliably, shot accurately, and served adequately in their designed role. The problem was that role no longer existed. Modern historians examining the Pacific War often focus on naval battles, island campaigns, and the atomic bombs that ended the conflict. But for the infantrymen who fought and died on dozens of Pacific islands, the war came down to fundamentals. Could you shoot faster than the enemy? Could you reload before he killed you? Could you suppress his position while your squad maneuvered? For Marines with M1 Garands, the answer was yes. For Japanese soldiers with Type 99 rifles, the answer was no. The rifles sit today in museums and private collections. The Type 99 is recognizable by its distinctive dust cover and monopod, features that seemed advanced in 1939. The M1 Garand is celebrated as one of the finest military rifles ever produced. Collectors value both weapons for their historical significance and engineering quality. But the cold historical fact remains. In combat, one was vastly superior to the other, and that superiority helped determine which nation would win the Pacific War. The Japanese soldiers who believed their rifles were adequate learned otherwise in 76 hours at Tarawa and in every battle afterward until their nation surrendered. They were not wrong to trust their weapons or their training. They were simply wrong about what they would face. Overwhelming firepower to every engagement, and at the heart of that firepower was a semi-automatic rifle that could fire 8 rounds in the time it took to work a bolt action twice. That simple mechanical advantage, multiplied across millions of soldiers and hundreds of battles, helped decide the greatest war in human history. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.